Hello, hello. Welcome to Office Hour, August 19th, 2022. Good to see everybody. Today we are going to discuss research equity. Okay, it will be an exciting one. So first, I'm going to start with disclaimers. All right. So once again, this is an online community for STEM adjacent people to talk about the behind the scenes experiences of us as researchers, practitioners, etc. And if you are watching on Twitter, I can't see. If you are watching on YouTube here, I will be able to interact with you. I won't know it's you unless your name is in your username. Okay. As another disclaimer, I am regulated under Title IX since this is work related to professional life. So if you do have a Title IX concern, please take that to your authorized representative at your institution. All right, let's jump right in. So this conversation about research equity was or is inspired by something I saw last week, a conversation that was started by an assistant professor from the University of Georgia. And oftentimes, I don't know if it's just the rhythm of social media or what, but we tend to kind of congregate or cluster around a common discussion theme in a week, like a weekly pattern. And this week was once again community engagement in research, and so I thought I would discuss it. The first thing I want to do is go over the definition of cognitive dissonance. I think it's going to be important for this. For anyone that's listening to my live stream or listening to the playback, this may be a difficult listen for this reason. So Psychology Today tells us that cognitive dissonance is a term for the state of discomfort felt when two or more modes of thought contradict each other. The clashing of cognitions may include ideas, beliefs, or the knowledge that one has behaved in a certain way. So why am I talking about cognitive dissonance? Well, you may feel a little uncomfortable with what I'm going to discuss today because it's going to contradict those of us who were educated in traditional academic U.S. institutions, especially R1s. It's uncomfortable to talk about what we're going to talk about because it's a clashing of beliefs. I personally experienced cognitive dissonance along my faculty journey. It is very uncomfortable, but you get through it the more and more you open your mind to new ideas. I like this question in Psychology Today, this page, and I will link this page in the description box after the live stream. Is cognitive dissonance the same as hypocrisy? Okay, so when you have two distinctly different thoughts in your mind, you, especially as it relates to community engaged research, you may begin to feel like a hypocrite. But let's talk about hypocrisy. It says no. Hypocrisy involves a contradiction between a person's supposed beliefs, principles, sorry, y'all, I'll read from right to lesson time, or character, and who they really are, or how they behave. Once again, let me read that. Hypocrisy involves a contradiction between a person's supposed principles, beliefs, or character, and who they really are, or how they behave. So a hypocrite is a person that has a certain belief and they just act the exact opposite, right? Cognitive dissonance, on the other hand, is an unpleasant mental state. So it doesn't really involve you doing something. Cognitive dissonance is the unpleasant mental state that may result if someone really does have certain beliefs, but thinks or acts in a way that contradicts them. So, okay, there is a little bit of action involved here. Forgive me. So the dissonance is the unpleasant mental state, and then there may be actions and words that follow this unpleasant mental state. Once again, I have found that community engaged research and the things that I'm learning about how best to do that causes a state of cognitive dissonance within me. Less so now, but very much so when I became a professor. All right. All right. So keep that in mind as you listen to this live stream. I also want to preface the discussion of these slides by saying it is okay to be educated in the US system. It is okay for you to think a certain way. What's not okay is for you to shut down other people's beliefs because they oppose your own. We really have to engage in critical discourse with each other and polite critique, because that's how we generate new beliefs, by listening to other people. So today we're going to talk about paradigms and steps forward when it comes to community engaged research and equity. All right. So here is the traditional human subjects research, or HSR, research paradigm. So those of us that do participatory research or any human subjects research in the social behavioral category, especially in STEM, this is typically what we do. We see a grant opportunity and we apply for it amongst ourselves in academia with other researchers. We get together, we brainstorm, and we're like, okay, we think this is a good experiment. We're seeking to prove or disprove this hypothesis, but we need to test the hypothesis across a sample. And the sample is generally the public. All right. Then let's say the grant has been funded and you're ready to start research. It's time to recruit participants. So this means going out and asking people to be involved in your study, right? I was a participant in a couple biomedical studies at Georgia Tech as a grad student because it's good. You know, you get a gift card or something like that. But we'll talk about what happens when we exploit this to the next level in just a second. And then once we get our participants, we execute a study on people, on human beings. And I want to pause here to say that the institutional review board at every university was put in place because human subjects research has gone awry in the past. And for those of us that have done the social behavior research training, they actually provide examples of the horrible things that have happened when we don't consider the ethics of the research we're doing. The Stanford prison experiment, for one. The Tuskegee syphilis experiment, for one. These are like a couple of examples, extreme examples of how STEM people or even like psychology people have misused the public when it comes to advancing scientific knowledge. So then we pay our participants, like I just said, and then after that, we're done. All right. We're done with the participants. We try to keep the study sterile and objective, and we try not to have sampling bias or any bias in how the participant behaves in the study. So we try to keep them as unaware of what we're doing as possible in some cases. In some cases, we're super uh, upfront, but there are research methods that require the participants to not know what the true nature of the experiment is, as to not bias the results. And you're probably already thinking of ways that this can be pretty problematic, especially when it comes to studies involving environmental health and climate justice. All right, and so we're analyzing the data independent of the participants that were involved in the study, and the academic incentive is to publish the paper with the results. All right, and usually the participants are kept anonymous. And for those of you that may not know, when it comes to doing human subjects research, we are required to keep participants anonymous. We cannot reveal the identity for their privacy purposes. All right, and so it seems very sterile, but actually we're under pretty tight rules when it comes to human subjects research. So number 6 is the ultimate goal of a researcher. We want to publish our paper. All right. And pretty soon you may see something published from me and several other authors about how this research paradigm could actually be hampering public good. Be on the lookout. Now, so that's the traditional paradigm, and you've probably already poked holes in that, especially those of you that are involved in community engaged research. So we're going to be talking now about the flip side to the traditional paradigm and the conversations that have been taking place for decades, but these conversations have been amplified on social media as of late. All right. So I found this thread to be pretty inspiring, and I'm going to credit Professor Tanya Galvan, who is an assistant professor of psychology at the University of Georgia in Athens. All right. So let's read through her tweet thread. Today, and this was August 12th, so 7 days ago. Today, I had a meeting with a community partner who shared with me very candidly why the org is hesitant to partner with researchers. We talked for 50 minutes. A few highlights emerged, a thread. Sorry if you can't see that. There has been a recent influx of researchers reaching to orgs who work with communities of color, in my case, Latinxes. This was initially welcomed, and there was much hope that the community was finally being seen. Quoted. Apologies go a long way. I wasn't the researchers they were referring to, but I represented the same system, so I apologize profusely on behalf of academia. The tone of the conversation changed with a simple apology. Chef's kiss, Professor Galvan. All right, so let's start. The hesitation to work with researchers. Ooh, you may be experiencing some cognitive dissonance here because in your mind, we are the heroes, maybe. We are going to use our institutional resources to make things better for the community. But on the flip side, they don't want to see us. They have a healthy fear of researchers for good reason. All right. And for those of us with shared identity with the community members, we especially experience cognitive dissonance because we're like, we're the good guys. We're on your side. We know the history. We are still, your identity changes based on where you are, what you're doing. Okay. So when I go to UC Berkeley, I'm not a Black woman. I'm not only a Black woman, I am a professor of STEM who is also a Black woman. And depending on where I go, one of those identities is going to trump the other. And when we're talking about community engaged research, my identity as a professor is going to trump my gender and race. Ooh, that's uncomfortable to sit with. So when we go and speak with community members, we're, sometimes you're taken aback, like, oh man, the trust isn't there. And for good reason. Let's keep reading. So she talks about the recent influx, right? So a lot of us have seen this shift toward an acceptance of community engaged research, particularly in STEM, because the 2020 pandemic, like I talked about last week, has shined a light on how systemic racism pervades systems that were seemingly inoculated from racism, but it's not. And so now uh, a larger fraction of the STEM community seeks to conduct research that investigates the racial biases within STEM research, or how race plays a part in racial engineering decisions. All right. So if you can imagine a community member that perhaps lives in Cancer Alley in Louisiana who is like probably pretty frustrated that no one's listening, and then all of a sudden here comes the academic community, like, how can we help you? It can be overwhelming, right? And they are justified in their hesitation and skepticism, especially if nothing has gotten done to this up until this point. This third point she's talking about, apologies go a long way. Ooh. Have y'all ever talked to your new community members and then they start expressing to you the horrible things or the horrible outcomes of community research partnerships before you got there? How do you handle it? Do you handle it with humility? Do you handle it with grace? Do you apologize, even though you've done nothing wrong? Ooh, that's a tough one. But I like what she said here. Apologize. Keep apologizing if you're getting it wrong. Keep apologizing and just ask for grace up front in knowing that you may make a misstep, because we have been indoctrinated with the traditional research paradigm that I told you about before. And how difficult is it to break away from traditional research paradigms, particularly if you are from a marginalized group? So just apologize for anything that happened before you and for what you may do. This takes an incredible amount of humility. And I'm just going to go ahead and say that that's what I rely on for my community engaged research: humility. Just shut up, say you're sorry, and offer yourself as like the most servant-minded researcher that you possibly can. Very good. Let's keep going. Community orgs feel used by researchers who they feel don't take the time to truly get to know the community and to listen. I talked about this already in several videos. In their words, they come in with their science questions and their questionnaires, pay us a few dollars, and leave until the next time they need us. I'm guilty. When I first entered community, I thought this is what we're supposed to do. Even though I was working alongside people at CCAJ, it's still not the right thing to do. All right. Think about how you feel when someone in academia emails you to pick your brain. They pick your brain, you spend 30 minutes with them to, generate research ideas, and you never hear from them again. And then 3 months later, they have a paper or a grant proposal with your intellectual property all over it. You will feel slighted and used. It's the same for the community members, except we don't view it that way because perhaps you don't see their knowledge and their input as valuable as that which is generated in the ivory tower. How is community knowledge valued? We'll talk about it. This thread isn't to gloat about my handling of the situation. It's to bring awareness to the fact that as researchers, we can and must do better. Absolutely. This conversation was not what I was expecting, and it was the most humbling experience I've had in my career. Oh yeah. It's humbling, y'all. Ooh-wee. Because most of us in STEM, or most of us PhD students, researchers, PIs, you were at the top of your class. You made all A's. You were always the smartest in the room. But guess what? Not in the community, we're not. we're not at the top of the knowledge hierarchy when we enter into community, especially if we're not from community. How am I defining community? Any group of people with a shared vision, shared core values. So we have to contend with this assumed knowledge hierarchy that we entered the community with and reject it. We must offer to listen. I listened to their concerns, validated and apologized, and then I asked the simple question of, how can I help you? Professor Galvan, if you're listening, thank you. How can I help you? These 5 words, y'all, can really just break down barriers and guards. How can I be of service to you? Service-mindedness can change someone from an adversary to an ally. But we got to make sure we're not doing this transactionally. I mean, people know when you're being transactional and not genuine with your service-mindedness. And back to the thread, much to my surprise, they had a research project already in mind. Yeah. Because we're not the only ones in STEM and in higher education that know how to create research projects. We're the only ones that work within an eligible institution to apply for grants. So who does that shut out from applying for grant money to conduct research? It was something I can help with. We agreed to continue conversations. All right. So continued conversations, meaning there's going to be more than one touch. All right. And it could be that the community member or the representative goes back, thinks about what you propose, and decides that they can't work with you. And we need to give community members the space to go back and ponder what we said, think about whether there are conflicts of commitment and interest, and say no. One thing I also experienced or realized in academia is that the higher up and the more privileged or esteemed or the more clout a researcher has, the more likely that they are not prepared for you to say no. Because why wouldn't you want to work with an esteemed researcher who's trying to help you? We'll talk about why in just a second, why people may say no to seemingly good opportunities. Because nowadays, people are making decisions based on their core values, not based on traditional incentives. We have seen what the prioritization of traditional incentives has gotten us, especially when it comes to research. Let's read the last part. These research practices are hurting communities more than helping. Womp, womp. They described it as painful because the orgs were told that the researchers could and would help them. So we're coming in as saviors. Okay, we've been seeing this in the international research. We're seeing it domestically now. In their eyes, they did nothing but use them as lab mice. Can't really see that. They fueled mistrust. So by the end of this thread, you should be feeling a little uncomfortable if you haven't engaged in this type of dialogue before. It's uncomfortable to know that you spent 5-10 years learning how to do community engaged research only to realize that you're part of the problem. And I'm talking to me. Let's keep going. I'm highlighting one of the responses that I thought was nice. Anthony Theodore Amato says, researchers must let go of power and restructure power dynamics. A word. A word. Those of us that are members of marginalized groups, we have power with the institutional brand behind our or in our email tagline. That is a different level of power, regardless of if we're getting treated like crap at work. Yeah, you can be a victim at work, an abuser in the community. I know last week I said you can't be both, but in this case, this is where sometimes we sit in community engaged research, especially in STEM. Researchers must let go of power and restructure power dynamics, must acknowledge and understand their own positionality. And as you said, listen genuinely. Y'all, it's one thing that I know about community, especially people from marginalized groups, they have a 6th, 7th, and 100th sense to know who's for them and who's not for them. If they don't want to work with you, it's probably because you ain't genuine. To what communities are telling you, genuinely listen. Do not hear only what you want to hear. Listen to their needs and priorities. We'll talk about this in just a minute. Work for them, with them. Let them lead the work. People with lived experience know what's best for them. Absolutely. So we're moving from going in and parachuting and telling communities what they need. Instead, we need to listen and create our research questions with the community. Yep. And fortunately, but unfortunately, these are my core values when it comes to research. I cannot waver. Several people have had conversations with me where it was uncomfortable because this type of enlightenment or this type of paradigm shifting challenges the traditional research paradigm. And guess what? I am not apologizing for that. All right. That led me to this nice resource here. This is a few years old, but speaks to the topic. We're going to talk about this nice website from Chicago Beyond when I'm done with the slides. Okay. Now I want to talk about challenging the research paradigm. These are some questions that I put together that I commonly ask people, and I've been asking them more and more over the past year. And this really came to a head for me in the fall of 2021, where I was suffering from the deepest forms of cognitive dissonance because we were emerging from deep quarantine and we were trying to do things and trying to incorporate justice and equity into our research. And I was like, oh no. I've been doing this work for 3 years and things it's still sticky. So these are some of the questions that I was asking myself and asking others. Point number 1. Who truly benefits from research outcomes? We have to actually say this in our research proposals nowadays. We have to talk about broader impacts. It's not just the one-off paragraph that we write so that we can get our proposal funded. Actually, this has pretty important implications. Who's actually going to benefit from what we're doing? Y'all, I ask myself this question all the time. Are we creating a prototype that's going to sit up on the shelf later? Are we creating space junk, e-waste, going to end up in a landfill? Are we prolonging much needed transitions because and I'm going to talk about that in just a minute. I don't want to get ahead of myself. A lot of times we want to convince ourselves that our research is helpful, but it's probably hurting. Number 2, is this what the affected groups ask for, especially when it comes to community engaged research? Is this what they asked for? Y'all, a couple times I've been through this in the last 12 months where a project has been brought to me, and I'm like, I know good and well that if I co-sign this, I'm going to get it from my community partners. I know I've listened to them long enough to know that they're not going to go for this. So what position does that put me in? In the position of dissenter amongst people that hold the fate of my tenure in their hands. Oh, well. Is this what they asked for? Are we completely ignoring the asks that have already been made? For instance, Southern California EJ groups are asking for complete electrification of the ports, stopping the development of warehouses beyond what they have already done. All right, is that happening? Or are we just designing around what they've already asked for? They are the ones, especially the frontline communities for warehousing, are the ones that have to live with our decisions in the I retire. Perhaps we should listen and maybe try to shift our solutions to meet what they're asking for. That's a new one. Do we as researchers know best? No. We may be expert in particle microphysics or thermodynamics, entropy. Sure, we're the experts there. But are we the experts in how horrible the air quality gets around a certain day if we don't live there? No, we're not. And we know we're not because generally EJ communities are under monitored. They simply are. A lot of people that live in underserved communities can't afford purple air. So if you go and look at those purple air maps, especially the indoor option, you see the gaps over supposedly underserved communities. I say supposed because they are not inherently disadvantaged. They have been strategically and systematically marginalized. Are you a member of okay, this is to the researchers. Are you a member of the affected community that you're researching? Do you have lived experience for what you're trying to talk about? And do you have the cultural competency to problem solve here? I alluded to a viewpoint that may be coming out soon. Cultural competency. This is important. I'm sorry, but a lot of people think lived experience doesn't matter, but it does. I was on a panel back in 2021 at UCR. I think, I can't remember what it was about, but someone was talking about some health endpoint that was worse for Black people. I was the only Black person on the panel. And I was pretty much saying, this is a confounder, this is a confounder, this is a confounder. This is why you can't connect the dots. Because you don't know why people are doing the things that they're doing because you don't have that cultural competency to know what their lived experience is like. And that's incredibly important. You're going to miss things in our human subjects and community engaged research because we simply don't know what their lives are like. It is arrogant to believe that our knowledge is all encompassing of people that we don't even spend time with. If you live in a cultural bubble, it is absolutely inappropriate to not have someone represented from the actual group that you're trying to study. When I was in grad school, there was a researcher, a professor who loved to research African American teenagers. This person never spoke to me to my face. They never directly communicated me, never looked at me. But you, someone who is exhibiting anti-Black behavior, when we're in close proximity, I'm talking about right next to me, you are going out and doing research for African American teenagers. Make it make sense. I'll never forget, and this is shout out to Ted Russell, my advisor. And I'm going to give him grace for this. I thought it was hilarious. We were talking about the prevalence of diabetes in the Black community in one of our research groups. I was an undergrad researcher. I didn't know nothing about nothing. And we started talking about the traditions of Southern Black people. I was the only Black person in the room. Ted had the courage to ask me, hey, what do you think this is, largely, about, eating habits and, diabetes in the Black community? And I was able to speak up about it because I know that our diet, African Black Americans in the South, the diet is a derivative of slave diet. The diet of enslaved people, based on the scraps that the enslaved people were given. So the diet you see today, and it's also a derivative of people that were able to cook for their supposed owners and things like that. So the recipes, and it's also derived from like African influence and things like that. But a lot of the scraps and the undesirable parts of an animal were given to the enslaved people. That stuff can be largely unhealthy. Okay? Which leads to diabetes. Let's go. Once again, do you have proper context to problem solve for a particular group or a population? And most times they don't. Are researchers part of the problem? This is a question I was asking myself in the fall. Holy cow. The cognitive dissonance. Yeah, I say. We're part of the problem when we don't speak up. When we're in rooms, we're in these huddles for conceptualizing research, especially stuff that involves justice, equity, and community engagement, and we don't speak up about potential harm. We're part of the problem. If you're sitting back and you're worried about hurting your colleagues' feelings, you're part of the problem. Do we actually stall progress by developing transition solutions instead of throwing support behind complete redesign? Yes. A lot of times we can get a lot of grant money to develop interim solutions before we get to the big change. I will not call out what those interim solutions are because I don't want to upset too many people. How committed are we to the status quo? Status quo being just put your head down, do the science, stay objective. Don't say anything. Don't rock the boat. Publish your papers by any means necessary. How committed are you to doing that while you know people are suffering? I would venture to say that academia has been pretty committed to status quo forever. Because going back to that power, I know that I have the power to speak up and potentially make a difference because of where I sit. We all do. And if you're not saying anything, you're part of the problem. And you're committed to the status quo. You're committed to your own comfort. Now, I want to talk about, some of the stuff on the solution side of things. I try to balance the good and the bad. All right. And so this is maybe an answer to the questions that I just raised and things that we may keep in the forefront of our minds as we go about developing research questions, engaging in community facing research, et cetera, et cetera. This was one of the first diagrams that I saw when I was going through a pretty serious period of cognitive dissonance from the Climate Justice Alliance. And I give them their props for this because I had never seen anything like this. And so essentially, they're moving from an extractive economy to a regenerative economy. And this is the premise of their plans for a just climate transition. Now, in this extractive economy, all right, you've got this circle over here where our labor, largely based on exploitation, is fueling this extractive economy where we take and just scar the earth looking for resources, mineral resources, water, to fuel consumerism, all right, and uphold colonial mindsets. I'll talk about this at the end of the slides, but a lot of our problem is because we buy too much stuff, too much stuff. All right. And then we sit up and innovate and try to come up with new widgets. And at least widgets don't require production, but they do require cell phones. I'm sorry, not widgets, apps. At least apps on your cell phone, don't require too many natural resources, but of course you need a phone. And so we want to innovate ourselves in a way where we can just make more money and end up being more extractive to the earth. But what if we just all not buy anything? We wouldn't have to be on this wheel. And this is all in an attempt to assume power and keep that power. All of this supports governance and militarism. So people in power, groups in power, oligarchs, people with wealth are able to sway decisions in the government. And people are trying to do this on a global scale through global militarism. I'm not going to get into that. And then we have in the middle, stop the bad, build the new, where we're going from changing the rules across different levels of governance and power. Especially, I want to bring attention to this right side of the diagram where they're talking about a regenerative economy, where the inner engine of this economy is cooperation and not market-driven competition. Imagine if we all in the city of Berkeley cooperated to fight against the absurd housing prices. What if we weren't all trying to uphold these bidding wars with property and just said, hey, we're not going to participate in this because people can't afford to live here anymore? What if we all did that? What if we all across the city of Berkeley cooperated to do that? Then we wouldn't have the atrocities that we see in People's Park. But I'm going to pose a question at the end of this that gets at why we may not be able to do that. This regenerative economy also focuses on care and sacredness. So caring about others and holding resources in sacred view. This gets back to indigenous knowledge, American indigenous knowledge, where they had respect for the world around them. It wasn't extractive. Excuse me, I am not an indigenous scholar, but I'm a little bit aware of the ethos behind those knowledges. Then we talk about ecological and social well-being. So making sure that everyone's okay. And this requires deep democracy, all right? And this is how we get toward a regenerative economy. And I'm going to posit that academia sits squarely in an extractive economy. This made me so uncomfortable when I realized this that I was like down for the count for a couple of days. I was like, oh God. So our business model in academia is admittedly extractive, and I will not talk about that in this live stream, but you can go think about it. Now, We learned about the tragedy of the commons sometime in high school, hopefully. This is precisely what an extractive economy leads to. The tragedy of the commons. So let's go through what the tragedy of the commons is. So in the leftmost diagram, we see that the use of the commons is below the carrying capacity of the land. All users benefit, right? So this is largely how things went down before the Industrial Revolution, where we were just living off the land. Yes, granted, infectious diseases were wiping us out left and right. But we weren't like tipping toward carrying capacity of the earth, of water resources, land, etc. Then we move on over to the middle, where if one or more users increase the use of the commons beyond its carrying capacity, the commons becomes degraded. The cost of degradation is incurred by all users. Imagine that. Imagine that when one person takes too much, the rest of us suffer. That's another thing that may lead to cognitive dissonance, because we all think that replacing our cell phone is just something we need to do. We don't think about the life cycle of a cell phone when we're at the store getting iPhone 10,000 for our cousins and our siblings for Christmas. I do. I am 10 generations behind on my phone. I try to keep it as long as possible because I know the resources involved in making that phone. I try to hang on to it as long as possible. Am I great at not taking everything, at not taking what I don't need? No, I'm not great at it. I try to be aware. So what if we're doing the middle thing in mass? What if? Well, open your window and look at what's going on outside. That's what's happening. Everyone wants a car. Families have 4 and 5 vehicles in a 2 and 3 bedroom house. Make it make sense. And lastly, on the far right, unless environmental costs are accounted for and addressed in land use practices, eventually the land will be unable to support the activity. And this is the tragedy of the commons, because we're not accounting for everyone needing something. And this is most egregious in the United States. Everyone in America wants everything. Now, more is more. The more is more mentality is rampant in America, and it's leading to the tragedy of the commons. And we like to point to other countries that host our manufacturing as the problem. But what about the demand for the product? And we are currently exceeding carrying capacity for natural resources on Earth. Hence, all of the climate and justice legislation that is going forward. Hence the Paris Agreement. Hence, all of the things that we as scientists and engineers are desperately trying to support, along with community groups, especially community groups and EJ groups, because we're trying to just stop this right now. So what does this have to do with research ethics or research equity? Well, the reason why we're doing the research is because of the tragedy of the commons. But the tragedy of the commons is related to the Industrial Revolution. We've streamlined agriculture where everyone can get a steak any day of the week. Everyone can have everything. And we're getting to the point where we can't sustain that anymore. And so we're trying to research our way out of these problems. But I'm going to pose a question. This is my last part of this. What if, in respect to climate, the environment, and carrying capacity, what then is our role as researchers if we all just gave up the comforts to ensure that everyone has what they need? What if we just did that? What if we only took what we needed? Would I even be in a job right now? What if excessive lifestyle was no longer cool? Social media, Instagram and TikTok is a problem when it comes to excessive consumerism because everyone thinks that they should live a luxurious lifestyle. I'm guilty of it too. I do my best not to engage in mass consumerism. But I'm going to posit to say that a lot of us would be out of a job if everyone just observed and only took what they needed and even gave up comforts to ensure they. So one of my students was, we were talking and we were like, we could have more housing on Berkeley's campus if we just knocked down a parking garage. Ooh, the cognitive dissonance. I was like, oh, I don't want to give up that one. Not that one. But what if? What if we knock down the garage that's closest to my building? But I commute because I can't afford housing in Berkeley. Because everyone wants to turn a profit during this bidding war. It is circular, and we're stuck on this loop, and it's going to take some reimagination to get off this loop and close it. Or just get off the loop and get rid of it. So let me take a step back and talk more about what we can do as researchers. And this will be how I end the live stream today. And yes, these are things that I am always thinking about. If I seem pensive, it's because my mind cannot stop thinking about this stuff. So let's talk about the link article from my slides, or the page that was linked in the tweet thread. So this is chicagobeyond.org. All right, a group that is really effective here at explaining things related to research equity. Why am I always being researched? Okay, and they have this wonderful guidebook for community engaged research. I want to focus on, in the last 10 minutes, 7 inequities held in place by power, 7 opportunities for change. That I think this is really good. It could be a good teaching tool for those of us that are teaching community engagement classes. So there are 7 points upon which we can potentially shift power and really improve our community engagement work. Access. Could we be missing out on community wisdom because conversations about research are happening without community meaningfully present at the table? Yeah, we are. We're missing out. I love talking to my community partners because I always learn something. I try not to be extractive, but I always learn something. And my research questions that I pose, in my opinion, are better for those conversations. Information. Can we effectively partner to get the full truth if information about research options, methods, inputs, cost, benefits, and risk are not shared? I don't think so. I don't think we can get at the full truth if we're not sharing everything. Like, I had a conversation with a community partner in Stockton. Hey, Jonathan. And I actually explained to him how the budgeting works, how the money flows. And Jonathan is on the ground doing the work, but no one had ever explained to him how that money flows. No, it's no knock on him. It's a knock on us. How can we optimize community engagement grants and budgets if they don't know what is accessible to them? And the loopholes, because there are a lot of loopholes that disadvantage community members. Validity. Could we be accepting partial truths as the full picture because we are not valuing community organizations and community members as valid experts? Yes. We are working with partial truths, especially those of us that don't have good relationships with community members. It's not the full picture, and therefore you're engineering in a vacuum and you're developing false solutions. Ownership. Are we getting incomplete answers by valuing? Let me just make sure. Are we getting incomplete answers by valuing research processes that take from rather than build up community ownership? Yep. It's incomplete. And in regard to ownership, questions about data sovereignty and data ownership, data access can really just get at this. We're taking from community if they don't have ways to readily access the data, if they don't have ready access to us, right? If there isn't a smooth way to pay them besides a gift card, right? Value, I'm sorry. What value is generated, for whom, and at what cost? Usually to benefit us on the academic side. And I'm alluding to my viewpoint once again that may come out pretty soon about who is incentivized and who benefits. Most times it's not community because nothing's changing. Cancer Alley still exists. Are we holding funders and researchers accountable if research designs create harm or do not work? This is a good one. Is there accountability when we propose something to the NSF and it ends up being a flop? No, we just write the annual report, write the report summary, and we move on. What kind of accountability structures can we put in place to make sure that what we're proposing will help? And if it doesn't help, what are we going to do about that? We ask up front, and I guarantee the community will tell you, no, don't do that. And we have to listen and be accountable. Authorship. Last but not least, I actually have talked about authorship at length on this channel, especially in episode 7, Hidden Research Costs. Whose voice is shaping the narrative and is the community fully represented? Y'all don't even want to give your colleagues authorship, let alone a community member. So let's stop being so tightly wound around how long the author list is, who's in what order, and give people the attribution and the contribution respect that they deserve. And once again, the question that I always ask myself is, would the product be the same in the absence of that person? If the answer is no, then they've made a significant contribution to the outcome or the output. Therefore, they deserve authorship. And I'm going to link this website below in the description box. And that pretty much wraps it up for maybe a much needed conversation, one that I think about a lot. And let's challenge ourselves to sit with the cognitive dissonance and try to work our way around those uncomfortable feelings and just be humble and gracious enough to perhaps change the way we think and incorporate those changes into the way that we conduct research. It's hard, but it's doable. I'm doing it right now. And last but not least, I'll leave you with a bit of encouragement for today. As you go into your weekend and as we start the fall semester, if you're burned out, check out the live stream from last week. It may give you some inspiration. You can't get different results doing the same thing. Try something new. Try a new approach. Think outside of your own box. Okay? If you want something to change in your life, do it differently. If you want to be more productive, maybe get up 30 minutes earlier. That's a small change that may have big ripple effects. If you feel like your research is stagnant, talk to someone that's not in research, but that's adjacent to the problem you're trying to solve. That may inspire your research a little bit more. I'm going to allude to a viewpoint led by Gretchen Goldman. Early career researchers may find a purpose outside of the lab. It's about public advocacy. And I'll talk about it later, but I just read an article that says that researchers shouldn't stand for any particular advocacy, like public advocacy point or any particular policy. I think that's a mistake. But a pretty prominent researcher wrote it, and so I'm just going to leave it be. I think perhaps our research could be more inspiring if we engaged in things that we don't normally engage in research. All right. With that, happy fall. I will see you all next week. And this concludes Office Hour.